When a president calls nearly 800 of his top military leaders into one room, it is never routine. What message was sent? To America, to its allies, and to its rivals? And the real question is, was it only about discipline, or is there something more? A few days ago, an extraordinary gathering took place at Marine Corps Base Quantico. Nearly 800 senior officers from across the branches of the U.S. military were called together by the President. Officially, it was a summit on discipline, readiness, and unity of command. But the sheer scale of the meeting and the decision to bring so many leaders into one room raised questions that cannot be ignored. Why now? And why in this way? In this video, we will break down what was said inside that summit, from the focus on military culture and chain of command to the warnings about loyalty, discipline, and readiness. We will explore what those themes mean in practice, not only for the armed forces, but for how America projects power abroad. Then we will take a step further, asking what might lie beneath the surface. Could this be about more than discipline? Was it also a signal, both to allies and to adversaries, that the United States is preparing for storms ahead? For Americans, this is not an abstract debate. The military does not exist in isolation. It reflects the society it serves, and its choices ripple outward. Whether it is the way soldiers are trained, the missions they are asked to carry out, or the role they could play in a time of crisis at home, decisions made behind closed doors at Quantico matter to every citizen. If you want clear, fact-based analysis that connects the dots without hype or fear-mongering, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. What came out of the Quantico summit was not just symbolism. It was a set of concrete directions meant to reshape how the U.S. military sees itself and how it trains its people. Let's start from the things said openly, because they already mark a cultural and organizational turning point. The first theme was physical standards and discipline. In recent years, requirements for fitness and endurance have been softened to attract more recruits. At Quantico, the message was the opposite. No more shortcuts. Future service members will have to meet higher thresholds of strength, stamina, and mental toughness. The idea is simple. Wars are not won by adjusting the bar downward, they are won by raising it. Second came outward discipline. Grooming and appearance. Rules on beards, hairstyles, and uniforms had become looser, with more room for personal expression. The new directive is strict. One look, one image, one identity as a fighting force. To the public, details like facial hair or uniform patches may look minor, but inside the ranks they symbolize cohesion versus fragmentation. Third was a direct pushback against what leaders called woke culture. For years, training modules on diversity and social awareness had been part of military education. Now the emphasis shifts decisively. Less focus on identity politics, more focus on the warrior ethos. The mindset that every soldier is first of all a combatant prepared for conflict. This is not just rhetoric, it is a reordering of priorities, placing combat readiness above all other considerations. Linked to that is a revival of ceremony and tradition. Tougher initiation rituals, more rigid parades, and training exercises designed to test endurance and obedience. Practices that once seemed outdated are being reintroduced, on the argument that hardship and ritual build resilience and unity better than classroom lectures ever could. The final thread tying these points together is readiness. Not in the abstract sense of long-term planning, but immediate readiness. The ability to move quickly, deploy without hesitation, and operate under pressure. Leaders stressed that in an age of drones, cyber warfare, and unpredictable crises, hesitation equals vulnerability. Taken together, these themes are more than cosmetic adjustments. They amount to a recalibration of the armed forces toward toughness, uniformity, and focus. More rigor, more selectivity, fewer compromises. It is a message to recruits and officers alike. The military is no longer bending to meet you, you must bend to meet the military. If the first message from Quantico was cultural, the second was even more concrete. Discipline and standards are no longer negotiable. Raising the bar is not about image, it is about operations. For years, the U.S. military has faced a recruitment crisis. Less than a quarter of young Americans even meet the minimum requirements for service when it comes to fitness, health, or education. Relaxed standards were introduced to fill the gaps: lower physical tests, more waivers for weight or medical issues, and training programs designed to accommodate rather than challenge. At Quantico, that era was declared over. Leaders stressed that a force built on lowered expectations cannot fight the wars of tomorrow. That means stricter fitness tests, tougher endurance trials, and less tolerance for failure in training. The practical impact is twofold. On the one hand, fewer recruits will qualify, which could shrink the size of the force in the short term. On the other hand, those who pass will form a leaner but more capable corps, better prepared for high-intensity conflict. It is a gamble, quality over quantity. The same philosophy applies to professional standards. Career soldiers who once might have been retained despite repeated failures or disciplinary issues will now face quicker removal. Training pipelines will likely be extended, with more emphasis on live exercises and less on classroom sessions. History offers parallels. After Vietnam, when the U.S. military was plagued by low morale, drug use, and weak performance, the Pentagon launched a sweeping reform to restore toughness and credibility. The same happened after Iraq and Afghanistan, when counterinsurgency required reshaping training methods. Quantico signals another turning point. This time the pivot is back toward great power conflict, where endurance, speed, and cohesion matter more than numbers on paper. For Americans watching from the outside, this may look like an internal adjustment, but it carries broader meaning. A force that raises its own bar is a force preparing for scenarios where hesitation could mean defeat. And that raises a deeper question: if the military is reshaping itself so drastically, what kind of wars are its leaders expecting next? If stricter discipline and physical standards marked one axis of change, the cultural front marked another, just as visible and far more debated. At Quantico, senior leaders spoke openly about what they called a rollback of woke culture inside the military. That term, often used politically, was applied here to programs of inclusivity, gender training, and diversity initiatives that had expanded over the last 2 decades. The message was not subtle. Those programs would no longer be a central priority. Instead, the focus would return to combat readiness, technical training, and the ethos of the warrior. For many inside the ranks, this shift is framed as a relief. Surveys have shown frustration among soldiers and officers who felt time in training was increasingly spent on seminars rather than field drills. For others, especially veterans of recent reforms, the move raises concern. Critics argue that inclusivity programs were not distractions, but tools for building cohesion in a diverse force. In Congress, the split is already visible. Supporters of the rollback frame it as restoring tradition, while opponents warn it risks alienating potential recruits at a time when numbers are already low. What matters for the force itself is not the politics, but the effect on daily life. A cadet in basic training will now spend more hours on weapons, tactics, and endurance, and fewer on classroom lectures about cultural awareness. An officer rising through the ranks will be evaluated more on field performance than on compliance with new social directives. The shift also sends a political message beyond the barracks. To the public, it signals a return to what leaders call traditional values. To allies abroad, it suggests an America preparing its military for tougher, less flexible missions. To adversaries, it projects determination to strip away distractions and sharpen focus. Whether that perception strengthens deterrence or fuels new criticism depends on how it plays out. What is certain is that this cultural change is not symbolic. It reshapes priorities, and in doing so, it redefines what it means to serve in uniform. If the cultural reset marked a change in training and values, the language reset marked an even sharper signal. During the summit, Trump revived an old idea he had floated before, renaming the Department of Defense back to its original title, the Department of War. On the surface, it may sound like semantics. In practice, names shape identity. The Department of Defense was created in 1949 at the dawn of the Cold War to emphasize a posture of protection rather than aggression. Shifting back to War Department would frame America's military not as a shield, but as a sword. Internally, such a change would affect how soldiers and officers see their own mission. It would tell a new recruit that the institution he or she is joining is designed first and foremost for conflict, not just deterrence. It would tell commanders that every training exercise, every deployment, every strategy is part of a war-fighting mindset, not simply defensive positioning. Externally, the message would resonate even more loudly. To allies in NATO, it would be read as a signal of hardening resolve, an America ready to fight rather than negotiate. To adversaries in Moscow, Beijing, or Tehran, it would be interpreted as a form of psychological escalation, proof that Washington no longer hides its intentions behind diplomatic phrasing. Words matter in international relations, and this one word would shift how the United States is perceived in every capital. For the American public, the impact would be subtler but no less significant. The Daily News would speak of a War Department, not defense, shaping how citizens think about their country's role in the world. Parents with children in uniform would feel the weight of the term differently. And in the political arena, the debate would be fierce. Supporters would call it honesty, a rejection of euphemism. Critics would warn it locks the nation into a state of permanent conflict. This is why the discussion at Quantico was not simply about tradition. It was about the power of language as strategy. If renaming the Department of Defense pointed outward to the world, another theme of the Quantico Summit pointed inward. The discussion turned to the role of the U.S. military not only overseas, but on American soil itself. Officially, the armed forces are designed to fight external threats. Yet in moments of crisis, they have often been called to act at home. Hurricanes, wildfires, even during the pandemic. The Quantico meeting raised the question of what that role should look like in the years ahead. The scenarios range from protecting critical infrastructure against cyber attacks to supporting local governments in the event of widespread unrest. On paper, laws like the Posse Comitatus Act limit the military's role in domestic law enforcement, but there are exceptions. The Insurrection Act has been invoked in the past to deploy federal troops inside U.S. cities when local authorities were overwhelmed. That legal framework means the barrier is not absolute. What the generals discussed in Quantico, according to those present, was not a plan for martial law, but an exploration of how the military might integrate more tightly with civilian authorities during emergencies. The implications are significant. For a citizen, it could mean seeing uniformed soldiers guarding airports, energy grids, or state capitals, not in response to a foreign invasion, but to prevent disruption at home. Supporters argue this would increase resilience in an age where threats are as likely to come from hackers or drones as from tanks. Critics warn it risks blurring the line between military and civilian life, changing how Americans experience their own democracy. The debate is not theoretical. Every crisis in recent decades has reignited the same question. Where is the boundary between defense abroad and security at home? By raising the issue at Quantico, the administration signaled that the line may be shifting once again. If the Quantico summit had ended with rules about beards, fitness standards, and ceremonial routines, it would already have marked a cultural reset. But the true significance lies not in what was said openly, but in what was implied. Bringing nearly 800 generals and admirals into one room is not about grooming codes. It is about cohesion. In a single day, the entire senior leadership of the U.S. military was reminded that they move as one body, not as isolated branches. That message, invisible to the public but obvious to those inside, matters when crises erupt without warning. It means that in the event of sudden escalation, whether in the Baltics, the South China Sea, or within the homeland itself, the decision chain has already been tightened and the culture reset toward obedience and readiness. This is also a signal outward. Allies in NATO see an America that is not divided, not distracted, but determined to impose discipline across its ranks. That strengthens deterrence, especially when Europe worries about wavering commitments. Rivals in Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran see the same event differently. For them, a president summoning 800 officers is not housekeeping. It is theater of resolve, a demonstration that the United States is preparing for more than routine deployments. The optics say, we can unify our military faster than you think, and we are not afraid to show it. There is another layer still. Inside America, the symbolism points to an identity shift. For decades, the U.S. military was described as a force of defense, a shield. The discussions in Quantico hinted at a return to a posture of permanent readiness for war, both outside and potentially inside national borders. That shift raises questions not voiced in the press briefings. Will citizens grow used to seeing the military as a visible presence in daily life, not just during natural disasters, but in prolonged periods of tension? And does this reset risk normalizing a mentality of permanent mobilization where America no longer separates clearly between peace and war? The Quantico summit did not answer those questions. But the very act of convening 800 leaders ensured that everyone left with the same subtext. Unity is being enforced, discipline is being sharpened, and the United States is preparing its military not just for today's conflicts, but for a world where the boundary between foreign battlefields and domestic security is less and less clear. In the end, the Quantico summit was not about haircuts or ceremonies. It was about drawing a line in the culture of the U.S. military. On the surface, it reinforced discipline, toughness, and unity, but at a deeper level, it raised a more complex picture. By gathering 800 of the nation's top officers, the administration sent 3 messages at once. Internally, that the era of compromise is over, and that the military must think of itself as a war-fighting machine first. To allies, that America can still pull its forces together and impose order when doubts about cohesion are growing. And to rivals, that even if politics at home are chaotic, the armed forces will present a disciplined front to the outside world. The real question, though, is what this means for the country itself. Does a sharper focus on discipline and readiness make America safer, or does it risk blurring the boundary between defense abroad and security at home? Will citizens see this as reassurance, or as the beginning of a shift toward a state of permanent mobilization? History shows that cultural resets inside the military often precede strategic resets in the way a nation fights its wars. That makes Quantico more than a headline. It is a glimpse into how the United States is preparing for the crises of the future, whether declared or undeclared, inside or outside its borders. And so the final question is not what was said in the room, but what it reveals. Is America simply resetting discipline? Or is it laying the groundwork for a new doctrine of war that will shape the lives of soldiers and civilians alike? If you want to continue exploring questions like these, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments which aspect you think will shape the future most.